Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. So each of us, I believe, this is one of those passages where each of us has a relationship with this passage. It's one of the most beautiful passages in the Bible. It's one of the greatest, if not the greatest, sermon ever preached. I have sort of a strange relationship with this passage I just read at the end. When I was in seminary, I've mentioned seminary before, and so some of you have heard some of this, but I entered seminary the year that Gene Robinson was consecrated Bishop of New Hampshire. And for some of you, like, okay, a new bishop. But this was a big deal at the time because this is the very first openly gay bishop who was consecrated. He was elected by the Diocese of New Hampshire. And that happened in, I think, the spring of that year. And in the fall, we all arrived for seminary. And I was in a seminary in Tennessee where it was about a third of the people thought, well, that's a good thing that happened because we've been talking about, homosexuality and things around of that nature since the late 70s. And now it's, 2002, and it's about time that, things progressed. 1/3 said, I can't believe, 1, we're talking about this in public, and 2, such a thing could happen. And then the other third were saying, we don't want to talk about any of this, don't ask him about it. That was kind of how the seminary was divided. And the arguments that we had as a seminary class were brutal. A lot of very passionate arguments on both sides. I was incredibly passionate on this issue. My father was, back in the day, was a chaplain at a university chaplain in the 70s and early 80s when I was a little kid. And he pastored to a lot of the gay community at Western. And a lot of this was kind of normal for me. And I would love to say that I handled myself with grace and charity, but I did not. I was just as, I was mean. We were all mean. We all thought that we were prophets standing up for Jesus. And this passage, I remember there was a particular Sunday, we had a brutal town hall meeting where just terrible things were said. I think if you believe that, you're going to go to hell. No, you're going to hell. Just really charitable stuff that you'd want future priests to say, And I remember after a particularly brutal town hall, the university chaplain selected this gospel passage, and it wasn't in the lectionary, he chose it. And when we got to this section, blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account, on the account of Jesus. I'm like, that's me. People are saying evil things to me, and they're saying on account of Jesus, but I am rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets, who were, well, I'm a prophet then. Excellent. And I felt very empowered until I realized that the people that I was arguing with were just as empowered by this passage too. They thought, I'm being persecuted. This Canadian liberal telling me what to think. I feel very persecuted. It shocked me that if anything, this passage divided us further. That the more we felt persecuted, the more right we felt, the more prophetic we felt, and the less we were willing to compromise. The more you pick on me, the more like Jesus I am. If one of us ends up on a cross, then maybe we'll know that person, right? It's just extreme stuff. And so for a long time, I found this a really troubling passage because it's so empowering when you are being violently persecuted or verbally abused. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily help to bring us together. Because sometimes people are disliked and even reviled because they've done some really terrible things. And how do we discern the difference? But over time, of course, like so many passages in the Bible, I've realized that this passage is not meant to be taken utterly by itself, but this is a part of a very, very long sermon. We have the very opening paragraph of this sermon, but it goes on for quite some time. It starts in the beginning of Matthew chapter 5, and it goes into chapter 6. It's a long sermon. And I think the first clue that we get are these blesseds. I believe that all of these blesseds that you can see in your, you can read along with me, each one of those helps us to understand the kind of person Jesus is talking about, who is being reviled and persecuted. Blessed are the poor in spirit. This passage literally means poverty of spirit. It means, are you starving for God? Is your heart and is your mind starving for the sacred and the holy? Do you have a deep hunger for God? Are you grieving? Are you grieving not just for yourself, but for the people around you, for our world? Blessed are the meek. This word meek in the Bible, it doesn't mean like a little bird or chipmunk. To be meek means that you believe in the strength of God. It is the opposite of self-interest. You could say that soldiers are meek towards their commanding officers because they believe that the orders are right and that they are standing up for the right reasons. To be meek is to be strong in that you believe that God will protect you and that God is right. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. That word righteousness, there's a cool Greek word called dikaiosune, but what it means is to be righteous is to be the person that God has called you to be. Do you have a deep hunger and a deep thirst to be the person that God has called you to become? To be righteous is to be filled with integrity, a love of God, and to live in a world filled with righteousness is a world filled with justice, where everyone sees God in one another. Do you hunger and thirst for you to become righteous? Are you merciful? Are you pure in heart? There's a beautiful description of this word, pure. It's katharos. It means the images of a vine that's been pruned and shaped and ready to bear fruit. That's to be purified. Are you free from guilt? Are you sincere? Are you pure in heart? And are you a peacemaker? Are you a lover of peace? These are the questions that we have to ask ourselves before we get to claim the mantle of sainthood and the mantle of martyrdom, like my entire class desperately wanted to do. Just because you're being persecuted doesn't necessarily mean that you are a saint. And these are all questions for us. I'd love for these to be questions that we would aim at other people, right? Like categories to say, well, I wonder if that person's being persecuted. Let's put this gospel lens on them. Jesus is very specific at how things change to you. These are questions for you. These are questions for me. These were questions for Geoff, the seminarian, who wanted to be like Jesus. Was I a peacemaker? Was I seeking out peace? No, I wasn't. I really liked the argument. It felt good. I liked it. Was I hungering and thirsting for the sacred? Was I grieving as we argued? Was I merciful? Was I pure in heart? These were all questions that I needed to ask myself in those moments when I was thriving on righteous anger. And these are questions for us because, of course, they come up time and again. And we're a society where we continue to seek justice, and we're a society where a lot of the values of the gospel have entered into every heart. And when we see victims, we have great empathy and care. But these are the questions that we have to ask ourselves when we ourselves feel victimized. Because this feels really good to feel that feeling of righteous anger. It feels good, and it can be destructive. And the issues of our community in seminary, they were not resolved when everyone realized that I was right. We became, in a sense, we became a community, we became a village. We prayed together every day, and it shaped us. Praying together every day changed us. For both the left and the right, because in the States, at that time especially, things were very polarized. The Iraq War was starting as we were talking. And we saw the other side as monstrous. And we went from being monsters to human beings, to lovers of God, and we began to love one another. And we were shaped and changed. And our love for God and for one another was how we defined ourselves, not any particular fanatical adherence to an issue. That it was a powerful thing, and God continues to shape us in our community. So I encourage you, when you have these moments, and I think we all do, because we are celebrating All Saints' Day, where people were killed for the cause of righteousness and justice. This stuff is very real, and there are people who are martyred every day for love of God and for love of neighbor. This is very real stuff, and it's incredibly powerful. If we ourselves want to see ourselves in that way, these are some very powerful questions for us. The bar is set very high when we think about the saints of the church. Amen.